Welcome to this brief introduction of the book of Daniel. It's being presented by the Charlotte Church of Christ in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're located at 5327 South Tryon Street. We hope if you get an opportunity when some of these restrictions on being out and about are lifted, we hope that you can come and visit with us. In this introduction, I would like to kind of relate why we're going with the book of Daniel, and just kind of line the book up with our understanding of history, so that as we start in chapter 1, we know just exactly what has been going on. We're living in a difficult time. A few months ago, nobody even knew what COVID-19 was, and a few months ago, some would have even said that the current health crisis that we're in would be totally impossible. And I believe that I can say without fear of contradiction that there are still some here at the beginning of April in 2020 who are in denial, who don't believe that there's really that big of a problem. We've been very blessed in our lifetimes. It's been nearly 100 years since we've had anything that came near to approaching the problem that we have right now. The challenge for us is not simply to live through this. The challenge really is to thrive spiritually. There is more to this world than what we can see with our eyes, what a camera can capture. But so often that is missed. We live in a time where the news breaks and it's big news, and all anybody can see is COVID-19. Just as an example, last week an F5 tornado ripped through Jonesboro, Arkansas. It killed several people, terrible devastation, and yet it only received a slight mention on the news. But everything is focused on COVID-19. That seems to be all that we can see right now. And yet what we need to understand as Christians is that there is more to this world than what we can see or what a camera can capture, a news crew can actually put on our television. That's illustrated very well in the book of Daniel, and that's why I've chosen this study for this video series. God had a plan for these people, even though it may have looked like all of his plans had gone awry. It might have seemed like this great and wonderful promise that God had made. He gave these people a land. He promised that all nations of the earth would be blessed. And all of a sudden, it all seems to evaporate. It seems to disappear. But what human eyes could not see, God had squarely in his plans. In fact, everything that was going on was truly a part of the grand plan, his knowing human history before it takes place. You know, in times like these, we might wonder what benefit we could get from this, but you know, and I could probably name several things, but there's one thing in particular that I think we should be reminded of. Before all of this has come up, this world was more and more becoming our home. We weren't just a passing through. Our treasures were being laid up here, and this was our focus. This was what we saw. And now that all of this has taken place, I think perhaps that when we come out on the other side, we'll be stronger spiritually if we take the lessons away from this that we should. After all of this is finished, it's my prayer that all of us can truly sing that song about "This world is not my home. I am just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue." And then the hardest words of that song we'll be able to sing far better than, "I can't feel at home in this world anymore." Well, let's talk about the events leading up to the defeat of Israel and the capture of the city of Jerusalem and the capture of the captives at the beginning of the book of Daniel. When we turn back in our Bibles to the formation of Israel as a nation, we know that God had taken them from the crucible of Egypt. He had led them out, and he had given them a law. And when we come to the book of the book of Deuteronomy, we find them just on the other side of the Jordan River, about ready to come into the promised land in order to conquer it. But before God was going to give them that land, Moses was going to go over several things with them. Not only did they go over the law itself, but Moses went over with them blessings that would be theirs if they served God faithfully, if they were faithful to Him, and curses that would fall upon them if they disobeyed God. And so I'd like for you to turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy 28, and keep in mind that I may get to a passage and start reading before you get there. Remember, you're watching a video. You can pause this, you can back up and do as you like with it. And so I may run a little bit fast. I'm not being insensitive. I just know that you're able to do that. I can't do that. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 28. I want to look beginning in verse 49. We have two verses here that are pertinent to the situation at the beginning of Daniel chapter 1. Here we read that the Lord will bring a nation against you, in other words, against Israel, against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as the eagle swoops down, a nation whose language you shall not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, who shall have no respect for the old, nor show favor to the young. And then if you'll drop down further in chapter 28, drop down to verse 64. I want to read a few verses here. Verse 64, moreover, the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, which you or your fathers have not known. And among those nations you shall find no rest, and there shall be no resting place for the sole of your foot, but there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing of eyes, despair of soul. So your life shall hang in doubt before you, and you shall be in dread night and day, and shall have no assurance of your life. I believe that one of the important things in Daniel, one of the important purposes in writing it, is not just the prophecy that's there. That's usually what we run straight to, and of course it is a purpose in Daniel. God was letting His people and us know just exactly what God had planned. But other things also come into play here as Daniel is writing this book. It is important for the Israelites to realize that they have no reason to doubt God. They've been drawn into this terrible tragedy, this national tragedy. They have been taken captive. They've been dispersed in foreign lands, not because God had given up on them, not because God wasn't going to keep His promises. This all happened simply because they had been disobedient to God. They had not served Him, and the curses that God had foretold in the book of Deuteronomy, they're now coming to pass. As those curses come to pass, we see promises coming to pass. We may not think of curses as promises, but that's exactly what they were. They were promises. If you do this, I promise this is what's going to happen to you. God's promises are coming true, but they're not going to look at it this way. They're going to see a nation that has fallen to ruins. Its people have been the survivors of the people. They've been taken off into captivity, and they're going to imagine that their God, He doesn't care about them anymore. He's not going to do anything for them anymore. They're going to fall into doubt. And that's what the curses here state as we come down to verses 65 and 68 of Deuteronomy 28. And that is that one aspect of this is your disposition, your feelings during this time. You're going to fall into doubt. Well, the book of Daniel is going to show them that there is reason not to doubt, but there is reason to believe that God truly is still their God, and He still takes care of those who are faithful to Him. And that's what we begin to learn when we turn to the book of Daniel. From the time of the occupying of the promised land, the people flirted with these curses. over and over again. They fell disobedient. In the book of Judges, we have a constant cycle where they would disobey God and he would bring oppressors. Then they would end up crying out to God. We find that over and over again through the period of the kings, many of these were extended periods of disobedience. We see that in the northern kingdom when Israel is carried away into Assyrian captivity. And then we find that in the southern kingdom. They did not pay attention to what had happened to their sister to the north, but instead they were disobedient also. And falling disobedient, God leveled the curses against them that he had warned them of. The southern kingdom was not taken away until roughly 127 years after the northern kingdom. They had all of that time to get their act together, and yet they didn't. So the southern kingdom fell into the hands of the Babylonians. Now what we read of in Daniel 1 was the first of three phases that took place in 605 BC. In 605 BC, we have this first phase. Nebuchadnezzar comes up, the city is taken, captives are carried away. On two more occasions, we're going to find two more waves until in the last wave, the city will actually be destroyed, the last of the captives carried off. Now, let's talk about Daniel just overall, looking at it kind of a bird's eye view, I guess you would say. When we look at Daniel, we can divide it just almost exactly in half by chapters, for sure. Chapters 1 through 6 and chapters 7 through 12, they have their own place in the book. What chapters 1 through 6 actually do is they get us ready for chapters 7 through 12. In fact, some of the early chapters in 1 through 6, they get us ready for things that happen later on in that section. But this first section, it provides a greater amount of historical detail so that we can understand what's going on. And along with the dream of chapter 2, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has and Daniel interprets, these things help us to understand the information that's given us in those last chapters, which deal primarily with visions. Now, the second section with these visions, they give a great deal of insight into the future of God's people, the world in general, but God's people in particular, and especially with a view to the fact that God is going to establish a kingdom. There would be the kingdom of the Messiah. That's introduced for us in Daniel chapter 2 with the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. But as we get through the beginning section and we go to chapter 7 through 12, we find a lot more information that helps us get to an understanding of that kingdom, when it would come, the things that would happen in the meantime. And knowing all of those things that would happen in the meantime will help the Jews get through that period where it just seems like God is taking forever. Maybe he never really intended to establish a kingdom to begin with. But when you look at the prophecies, it gives you a timeline, and it helps you to see exactly when these things are going to happen. Now, it's important that we understand our circumstances in this world in the proper light when we read Bible passages. It's really easy for us to look at Bible passages and to act as if they were written directly to us, giving us specific promises. And we have to beware of how we are going to make Daniel apply to us. Is it going to be some kind of personal application for a current disease, or are we going to get the spiritual benefits out of it that we need? There are lessons and principles that we need to take away from these studies, and I intend to introduce you to those and bring them across so that we can apply them to our lives. But here are three things I want you to consider as we study this. First of all, the book of Daniel and the remainder of the Bible, it never promises that we will not catch COVID-19. Now you're gonna hear some evangelists in the world, some televangelists. They're going to tell you if you caught COVID-19, you were disobedient to God. Wow, man, you better get your life straight. You better get it straight in a hurry because God is smiting you. The Bible doesn't teach that. You know, the rain that God sends and the sunshine that God sends, it falls on the just and the unjust. And some of the times, time and chance just happen to us all. Those are the words of the wise man in the book of Ecclesiastes. We have to understand that God has not said everything's just going to go perfect for us in this life, because there will be adversities. Read James chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Count it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. Okay, well, today they would tell you, you won't have any trials if you're being faithful to God. That's not what James says. James says that we will have trial. And in fact, that trial will help us to attain wisdom if we will use it properly. Now, the second thing that God has never promised us is that if we get COVID-19, He's going to heal us. And there's some people who are going to tell you that as well. And I just refer you back to what I just said about never catching it. He didn't promise you won't catch it, and He did not promise that you're going to be healed of it. God has promised, however, to take care of us. Our focus in all of this must be on the world to come. He's going to take care of us because that's what's important. He has never promised me that if I jump off of a cliff, He's going to keep me from hitting the bottom. But He did say, I'll take care of you. Look at the lilies of the field. The way God takes care of them, it's a thing of beauty. God takes care of us. The problem with us is He doesn't always take care of us the way we want Him to take care of us. You remember taking care of your children and how some of the times you had to show some tough love. You had to teach them some lessons that they didn't want to receive. You had to make decisions that they didn't want you to make those decisions in that way. And yet you did so because you loved them and it was what was best for them. We can't see so clearly here upon this earth. We like to imagine when bad things happen to good people that God messed up somewhere. And the truth is, God doesn't mess up. The truth is, we've brought curses upon ourselves in this world by sin, disobedience to Him. From the very beginning of the Bible, we read of it. If you're a Bible believer, you know it's true. And if that's true, then we have to take the bad with the good, just as Job was willing to do. And we have to be ready to serve Him, whether things are good or whether things are bad. And we need to let the adversity bring out the best in us. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, Jesus said some words that, while He does not there speak specifically of a disease like COVID-19, He does say, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on this earth, where moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. But rather lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The question of this series is going to be, where is your heart? Is your heart here on this earth, focused on what you can get here? Or is heaven your home? Is that what you're seeking? I hope you enjoyed this series. Open your Bible with us to the book of Daniel as we study it together. Thank you.